This is part 2 of the slideshows on subculture and conspicuous consumption. Make sure you watch part 1 before you watch this one. Okay, so we talked about one model of conspicuous consumption, which was all about this top-down control of culture, essentially, where a few people that have lots of money decide what is going to be in good taste or fashionable for everyone else. Another model of conspicuous consumption is based on Dick Hebdige's work on subcultures. It's not as much modeled on him, of course, as it is the subcultures that he studied and wrote about and talked about. You've got a reading about that is a really famous work of cultural studies, where he's essentially looking at a variety of different youth subcultures in Britain, the mods and the punks, for example, and trying to understand and explain why they dress the way they do and do the things that they do. And relate that to the broader cultural landscape. So his formulation of subculture is, on the one hand, indeed about fashion, but it's about fashion as meaningful communication, relevant to identity and how people make sense of themselves in a culture. The Fisk reading on shopping malls ties into this as well. So subculture can be defined as a distinctive clique within a larger social group, a subculture, a group within another group. Okay, so that is one thing, subcultures. The other thing, though, that we're really talking about in order to formulate this idea of conspicuous consumption and how important subcultures can be to the idea of a kind of communication of identity is spectacular subcultures. Okay, so think about this, what this means. Spectacular subcultures aren't just a group within a larger group. They are a smaller group that is communicating its relation to this larger social group. How does it fit, or how do they see that they don't fit? All right, so they're spectacular in the sense of making themselves visible. You can see and identify these subcultures rather than not knowing they exist. You don't have to know these people. Visually just seeing them, you recognize this, and this was why they're described as spectacular. So the idea is that these subcultures communicate two different things. One, group identity, that they are a member of this particular group. Secondly, difference, that they are not part of the larger social group, that they in some fundamental ways don't buy into, do not consider themselves, don't abide by the same value systems or ideologies as the larger group, the larger social group. Okay? So two related but different things. One, group identity, relation to each other. Two, difference, different from everyone else outside. Okay? So that gets us, again, to thinking about, as an example, punks, and we looked at superstar punks, the Sex Pistols in that clip. But again, they're such a great example of how punk style is and can be about consumption, but a different kind of consumption that is seeking to turn these codes or ways of dress into something else. Okay? So spectacular subcultures engage in a kind of intentional communication through particular codes, meaningful choices that signify that kind of difference. So if you think about, making jewelry out of stuff that's like hardware, that's not meant to be jewelry, ripping up jeans, wearing trashy clothes as fashion, that's a great example of that kind of intentional communication, breaking codes in order to signify something else. Now, again, that ties into what you've read from John Fisk about fashion and individualism. And I think it's important to reiterate and think about this, because Fisk is talking about, he's not hearkening back to the 70s and subcultures then of punks, but he's looking at other things that may more recently be maligned in our culture. And even his stuff is a little bit dated, but he wrote about things like girls who wanted to dress like Madonna. And in our own culture, we could think about, whatever recent pop star people are seeking to look like. Often those are just dismissed as being, mindless teenagers that want to look like their star and just dress like whatever it is that she does. What Fisk points out is that we should think about the difference between style and taste. And style, indeed, whichever style you buy into, for example, are you goth, punk, emo, indie, for example, if we think about it in terms of music culture, subculture. The style suggests which group you're part of, what kind of clothes you wear, and what is typical of that particular group. But then within that, there's the idea of individual taste. And so within the subculture, individuals will do different things differently. They will choose particular choices to differentiate themselves from the others. And the important thing about this is that from outside the subculture, if you aren't a member of it and you don't understand the various codes, it all looks the same to you. They all look the same. They are just all a group. But if you're a member of that group, you understand all these differences with the particular choices that you make about doing this with your clothes or with your shoes or with your jewelry or whatever those particular choices are that you make that differentiates yourself from others. So to kind of sum up here, the point is that, it's not just about everyone being a follower. They look to the outside as if everyone's dressing the same. But in fact, as a member of that subcultural group, there you recognize differences. And you really don't care if people outside the group don't recognize those differences. What you care about is that they recognize that you're a member of the group. And within your group, you want to communicate difference from one another. That's important as an individual. Okay, so I just wanted to point back now very quickly to something we discussed units and units ago, the idea of commodity fetishism, where Marx talked about how this is a process in which you have these mass-produced goods and they're emptied of the meaning of their production. They're made into something else. They've filled up with new meanings so that they have exchange value. And the typical Marxist way of making sense of how that works is that, the heads of industry use advertising and decide what those products are going to be, create value for them, spend a lot of money on making them into something that they aren't really, that doesn't have anything to do with their use value. But when we look at subculture and we think about this different model of conspicuous consumption, what we see is that actually individuals and people can engage in a kind of commodity fetishism too. That is, they can make something mean something else, all right? So, we're talking about cultural style. We can then think about two different models of where style comes from, where fashion comes from, and what it means to wear this or that. On the one hand, there's the brick model of cultural style. And this is the notion that style is basically decided by those few people who have lots of money or who run fashion companies. And style is basically thrown at us. And either it hits us and we buy into that or it doesn't. Right? But it's decided from above by those limited number of people. The other model of style instead looks at the consumer or the individuals as being the ones that instead of just having this hit them or not, they work as a more kind of bricoleur. The people that pick and choose these different options and put them together, like a bricklayer builds a wall. The cultural bricoleur picks and chooses from all these different things and makes something new. So the bricoleur model of cultural style is more the second sense of conspicuous consumption. That is, style comes from below and from the individual in the street, right? So commodity fetishism then can be the work of consumer of products, not just the producer. However, we ought to, of course, recognize that much of the time the way that fashion works is that there is some kind of innovation, say, on the street level. People innovate and do something different, and then that is very quickly turned into a new kind of style to be sold to us to consume. So I'm going to show you a few quick ads of things that I found looking on this issue. This is an ad for a jean company. I don't know if they exist anymore. I thought they just had a funny name to start with, Damage, right, which is Frenchifying the word damage. And blue jeans are a classic example of that interchangeable product that has to be emptied out and made meaningful in some way. This ad is showing us that these are jeans for rock stars, right? Those precious few people. But not only that, they're anarchy cloaked in denim. So a reference to punk culture, as well as you could think back to the Bill Bernbach stuff that we talked about with the counterculture and the idea of what you're going to do is you're going to harness that distrust of commercial culture that people have and that desire for the counterculture and turn that into a new kind of consumption. Here we see that with jeans. They are anarchy cloaked in denim. Buy them, and you not only can look like a rock star, but you can also symbolize your anarchy and your resistance to power. Here's another good example of how this kind of appropriation of fashion through industry works. This is a magazine photo series from a GQ magazine, and it's showing, this is a series they call Scene on the Street, and what they do is they go to various like hipster hangout places. This one happens to be Williamsburg and Brooklyn, and they take photos of guys, because it's GQ magazine, it's for men. They take a bunch of pictures of supposedly these random people that they meet on the street, and they ask them what they're wearing and where they got their clothes from. And so these cool looking dudes, all, their stuff is like from some girlfriend they had, or a thrift store, or a friend who was from Belgium got it for them. Most of the stuff is not terribly expensive, and certainly not actually identified with a price. But it takes work to get, takes cultural capital to get. Then on the next page they have how to get it. And this is the high fashion example of this street look, where they tell you all the different pieces that you can buy, and they all hover around $500 or more, right? So much more expensive. But an example of how that street bottom up example of cultural style works and how industry appropriates fashion. Okay, so of course this is how capitalism and style consumption work. Those subcultural expressions of difference that you're not like everyone else, right, very quickly become commodified and turn into something that can be sold to you in order to refresh and make, other products for people to buy once they've been popularized and seem to be somehow authentic, right? Now, as an example of this, I'd just like for you to think about that store in the mall that exists, Hot Topic. And if you walk into Hot Topic and you are overcome by all kinds of great things to buy, all kinds of things to buy anyway. But one of the things that they really trade in and they're built upon is providing these different kinds of uniforms for, teenagers to decide and communicate what social group they belong to, what fashion is, right? So there are so many different ones to choose from, and you walk in there, it's kind of overwhelming, all the different things that are there. But I bet you if you pay attention and think about it a little bit, you can pick out the different styles that are being promoted that you can buy and that are available in any mall in America and online as well. For your discussion this week, you've got another example of conspicuous consumption that's a historical one and is a kind of great example of thinking about how style is meaningful in very political ways. And so this is an article about the zoot suits, and you might have heard of the zoot suit riots during the Second World War. So please make sure and read that and discuss it in the forum.